If you want, I'll do them. I just have to get my laptop out of my bag. I'll get my laptop.
It's always better to have more people joining.
That's true, yeah. It's collaborative work.
Yeah, it's not just me.
Well, I'm probably
I
not
have
good
mine
at that
streamed
bit,
in the next room.
but you have too
Yeah.
many things to do.
What's the
Could you wear that?
ether?
Which I hate.
Uh,
Yes, slash is offline.
Offline? Will there be notes? There are notes. Oh,
Starting a new section.
yeah. It's not
You
saying
don't have
where
a
it's
good,
from.
Probably good.
Just
That's work.
title, so it might be old.
Oh, that is super old.
Put it under your sleeve.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so at the top, you know the deal.
Yeah.
You web.
Yeah.
Etherbed
Yeah, what is this
slash
one?
blah.
Offline.
Slash.
No, it's offline. But I just want the new
We had a
template.
template.
It's where Aaron comes back.
Apparently we've never had a session on blog before.
This is all in the live stream, isn't it?
It's like a medical device.
I know, it looks weird. It's actually really
Can
hard
you
to
hand
put
that?
this
No, yeah, you need separate hands.
I feel like I'm a T-Rex or something.
It's very awkward.
Right, offline. Thank you everyone for coming. So what I thought I could do is, if you want, briefly I could run through technical side of things, but more importantly run through the, I guess the UX side of things, recipes, things. Does that sound good? So the underlying technology this will be about is service workers. Who has familiarity with service workers? Okay, so I don't need to go into too much detail, probably. Maybe I'll do a tiny bit of detail, and then we get down to the interesting bit for discussion point. So, service worker is a weird thing. So you've got your website on a server on the internet, and then a web browser comes along and makes a request for a URL. Oh, it's fine. And server sends back that URL, and then usually starts also sending back a bunch of other stuff that's in the URL, like images, style sheets, scripts, blah, blah, blah. One of the things that the server can send back is a file, along with the images, CSS, and JavaScript, is a service worker script, which is written in JavaScript, but I would encourage you not to think of like all your other JavaScript files. It's different. Don't put it into your JavaScript folder. Don't concatenate it with all your other JavaScript. It's like a standalone thing. And it's almost like this thing is installed now in the browser. In the same way that you visit a website and that website installs a cookie into the browser. That cookie belongs to this website, domain basically, right? It's like that, except instead of it being a cookie, which is a simple bit of text, bit of static text, this is, like I said, a JavaScript file, so it's executable. It can carry out instructions. So it's way, way more powerful. And from this point on, once it's been installed onto the visitor's device, from now on, when the visitor is going to make a request to this same domain, it doesn't do it straight like this. It first checks with the service worker and checks the instructions included therein. And at that point, the service worker can say, well, here's what I want you to do. Like, yeah, I do want you to go and fetch the latest version of that file you want. But you can also say, actually, I've got a cache of stuff over here, and I don't want you to go out to the network. I want you to go to the cache instead. And you can start structuring logic like, well, try the cache first, but if that doesn't work, go to the network. Or try the network first, but if that doesn't work, go to the cache. And all these things. Or you can say, I know you requested this URL, but I'm actually going to serve back this other URL. And that could be things like, well, you requested a JPEG, but your browser understands this WebP, so I'm going to give you WebP. Or you requested this URL, but I can't reach the server, and I can't find it in the cache. So I'm going to give you this other URL, which is an offline page that I've stored in the cache. That's basically it from the technical point of view. So it's lots of ifs and elses, or tries and catch. Like, try this, and if that doesn't work, do this, and if that doesn't work, do that. So with that in mind, there's all sorts of, I guess, recipes you can put together. my feeling is that, there's some things you could do on almost every website, and it would be beneficial for, say, performance reasons. And there's other things that should be specific to that website, because it's all about the content. Well, the content on this website really needs to be fresh, so it's important to always try and go to the network a lot. Whereas, on this other website, it's basically never going to change. So if you can get it from the cache, always try the cache first. So to give you some examples, I published a book online, A Resilient Web Design. Now what that does is, at the point where user visits the homepage, I start sending down that URL and any images, style sheets, and I send down a service worker. Once the service worker is installed, I said, okay, here we go. I want you, at this point, start fetching stuff from the server. Fetch all of these web pages. Fetch all of these images and put them in the cache. It's quite presumptuous of me. You've just visited one URL, the homepage, and I've said, yeah, fetch all these chapters and images that are in these chapters. But from then on, every time this browser makes a request, ostensibly to the server, it's never going to hit the server. No, it will always, always, always go to the cache. So a bit presumptuous to me in that first visit, because suppose you don't want to read every chapter in my book. It's like, well, tough luck, you've just downloaded every chapter of my book just by visiting the web page. But, on the other hand, if you do want to read every chapter of my book, you can now do so on an airplane, or under the sea, or whatever, because it's all coming to cache. So that's extreme example of, I guess, offline first. As in, like, I'm never going to go to the network again. There's a recipe that's similar where you could say, like, okay, look for it in the cache. And if it's in the cache, serve that, right? But at the same time, or, once there's something in the browser, but, behind the scenes, go and grab the fresher version of that page or image or whatever it is and update the cache with the fresher version. Now, in that scenario, the user always gets like a fresh -1. They're always seeing the previous version of the page, which, in my opinion, is probably all right for things like blogs, maybe even news articles, where if it's going to be typos, or maybe it's just number of comments or stuff, you could decide that the performance hit is more important than the freshness. So you're kind of balancing these two things, I guess, which is freshness and performance. Because the most performant thing you can do is just not go to network and grab something from the cache. So this kind of fresh -1 pattern isn't bad. And also in this fresh -1 pattern, if your website's down or if the user's offline, but you've got a copy of that page in the cache, they're not even going to know that the website's down or that they're offline. So that's one thing. Do you go completely like cache first, offline first? Do you go for this kind of fresh -1? And then the other one is where you just say, no, freshness is really important. So let's say you do have a copy of the page in the cache, but what you're going to do is try the network first, and only if that fails, because either the user's offline or the website's down, then try looking in the cache. That's a good kind of general all-round thing, because showing something is always better than showing nothing.
How long do you wait, though?
Well, if it's a straight like, oh, the request failed, that will happen instantly. But you bring up a very good point, which is what if it's not that there's no internet connection. What if there's a shitty internet connection? Shitty internet connections are worse than no internet. If there's no internet connection, bam, here you go, here's a cache version. If it's a shitty internet connection, I'm trying to get it from the network. So that's a good point. One potential pattern is you basically start doing both. So you start the fetch request to the server, maybe start setting a timer, a set timeout of your choosing, and then meanwhile fetch from the cache. And if something comes back from the network, in a certain amount of time, cancel the timer and show that. If the timer times out, show the cached version. That's an option. It's kind of a bit of a race, I guess. So you can all these things are asynchronous, so you can simultaneously be trying to get something to the network and pulling something out of the cache. That's not a problem. You can sort of hold off returning that thing from the cache. So it's like, okay, the network's not working, go.
For how long?
So that's a very good question. And I might mess around so currently my service worker tries the network first And if there's no network connection, it goes, well, here's a cached version if it's available. But I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, actually, the shitty internet connection is the more likelier scenario.
Way too often.
Way more than, oh, you're just offline. And I might fiddle my service worker tomorrow to do that recipe where it's like, well, let's set a timer, let's try to get it from the network and cancel after, and that's my question, after what? What's the appropriate amount of time?
Live by.
Yeah, live hacks. Like, there's I mean, everyone says, 3 seconds when people get impatient. Can I push it to 5 seconds? Is that enough?
I maybe longer than 5 seconds when I know I have a shitty internet connection. Just
Yeah.
think of the case that it does finally work. I'm trying to picture when I actually get actively mad.
Hmm.
Well, and I love, so like there's the offline page thing where you can serve
Yeah.
a page immediately that says like, oops, you're offline. But you could also serve, a minimal page that's like, hang on, or add something into the page that's like, things are slow. I'm still working in the background.
Can you though? Because at that point you've returned something.
You can use the message API.
True.
Yeah.
So that works both directions, right?
Yeah, I've done that where you show the offline content
Yeah.
and then you wait until, I was just experimenting, I didn't end up
Yeah, yeah.
implementing this pattern, but then you refresh the page, but it ends up being annoying because you scroll, depending on how you do
Yeah,
it,
how
you
long-
do it better.
Yeah.
But you scroll down and then it jumps back up with a kind of
That also counts for the freshness -1 pattern. Let's say,
Yes.
okay, boom, here's the cached version. Oh wait, I just got the fresh version. How much time has passed? Have they started scrolling? Because I could, with the messaging thing, I
You
could
could
say,
even ask if they've scrolled, couldn't you?
ping it, and like, yeah, replace this.
Check scroll time.
But also,
Something.
if you replaced it smartly, it wouldn't flick.
Then you basically into like diffing,
Yeah.
right?
Close
And now
enough.
you've reinvented React,
Yeah.
basically. But no, I have seen, and Glenn Jones has got this working on his site, and it's so speedy. But he has basically done diffing in the browser, where it's like, I've got the cached version, the fresh version shows up a little later, and now I only update the bits that are different, if anything's different.
Didn't someone implement a React server render inside a service worker? I think
Almost
I saw
certainly.
that.
So these are a couple of different patterns now. So there's, just go completely offline, right? Never touch network again. Fresh -1. Race condition, like try the network, but after a certain amount of time, just use the cached version if it's available. Then,
Yeah.
like, show something and replace it with the fresh version if it ever comes in. It's potentially bit more overhead because we got this messaging
yeah.
thing. Yeah, a
Is
lot
some
more.
of this like content or context specific?
Do you mean?
Like your book site.
Yeah.
you
So
know
the book site's completely offline first. Yeah, like
not going to change.
it's never going to change. So that's like just cache, and I don't
Or
want
maybe
anyone
you
ever.
fix the typo somewhere. You know.
Then fresh -1 is totally fine.
Do you ever think of load occasion, Jeremy, as well? Like if you do want to really update it, so the next time they hit it, do you have a cache?
No,
version up?
so I was actually doing fresh -1 for the first year the site was up because typos were still being found. And then after a while, I reckon I've got them all. So I think I've now switched over to just offline first. So it was originally saying, oh yeah, here's the cache version, boom, speedy. But meanwhile, I'm going to fetch the more updated version. So the next time you come back, you would see a fresher version. Because the performance was more important than the freshness to me.
Yeah.
I'd rather you see it with a typo than,
Briefly.
yeah,
And not
or do not see it. So, but at this point, I reckon I've got all the typos, and it's basically a permanent archive at this point. But that's a really unusual use case, and most personal sites aren't like that.
I would say most personal sites are like that.
They're somewhere in the middle,
How
where
often do you change your blog posts? How often do you change your tweets?
it's less the blog post and the stuff around it, like web mentions and stuff.
Oh, the comments?
Yeah,
Because it's still one request.
it's
right?
one URL, right?
Yeah.
And again, you could get into some messaging like, okay, well,
About that.
you could do client side,
Unless the
updating.
comments aren't embedded.
yeah. So that's me. You could say, oh well, this part of the page is permanent, so we serve that, and then we use client side technology to. Get the latest
that's a good
posts.
argument to split those actually into like the static-ish part of a page and the part that might be more dynamic.
Or again, you have some kind of diffing thing where like
And-
get the fresh version, only update this bit of the page.
And the viewer's probably reading it for your article primarily anyways, and only secondarily for the comments, so it's okay.
It's okay if that part fails. Yeah, it's like the core content is the
It's kind of a
post.
graceful
Yeah.
degradation kind of.
The other thing here is I keep talking about like, oh, network and the cache, but how does something end up in the cache? So with the case of the book is the extreme one where all you do is visit one page and I'm putting everything in the cache. That does not scale. I would not recommend a personal site do that, unless you've only got a few blog posts, I guess, in which case, yeah, I'm going to literally put my entire website in your device.
Or you could cache them your past months worth of points.
So this is the question, how much do you cache? Well, so there's caching and there's pre-caching. So what I'm doing with the book site is I'm pre-caching all the pages. So you've only visited one URL, and then that triggers the caching of a whole bunch of, fetching and caching a bunch of URLs. That's pre-caching. Another option is as you just browse around the site, I've already gone to the trouble of fetching this URL to show it to you in the browser. I might as well cache it. So that's just, I guess, plain caching, not pre-caching. You know what I mean? You asked for this URL. So the pattern, and Mike, I think you were the first person to do this one, is that as people are browsing around your site, you serve them the page, and at the same time, you put it in the cache. So as you're browsing around, you're building up this cache of pages. And then let's say we do lose the internet connection. Your offline page can say, oh, sorry, you're offline, but here's all these pages you've cached because you visited them. All you did was visit. Now, that's obviously a lot more respectful than the offline book scenario because it's only caching pages you visited. So you explicitly requested those pages.
So I prefetch homepage, CSS, like essential JavaScript, anything else like that as well.
Yeah, there's kind of the no-brainer stuff to pre-cache. Yeah, pre-cache the offline page. Yeah, I would say pre-cache your CSS and JavaScript because that's kind of just performance stuff you want to do anyway. But then when it comes to the actual pages of your site, there's this pattern of as you browse around. So that's what I'm doing on my site as well. As you browse around, I store a copy, and then you lose your internet connection, or my site goes down, which happened last weekend. I didn't notice for 6 hours because I was still able to browse around the website. So the only downside with that is that there's a bit of an inference there, which is that the user's only ever going to see pages they've already visited, potentially already read, and maybe actually, that's the stuff that interests them the least because I've already read this. So another pattern is that you basically do an indie pocket or indie, what are the other services? The Instapaper. IndiePaper, there we go.
That's coming.
So you visit a URL on somebody's personal site, and there's some kind of trigger, a button, a toggle, something that says save for offline. And there you're putting it into the user's hands. And that way they don't then have to even read the article at this point. They go, you know what, I'm going to save this for offline. And then they visit your website when they're offline, and you say, here are the pages you asked to be saved offline. So I'm not inferring what pages you asked. So that's another pattern again.
Almost sounds like a bookmark.
Yeah, but bookmark is for offline. There's a few people have done this. Una Kravitz on her website. So it's worth looking at the interface patterns. How did they do it? Sarah Swadan's done it as well. I think in both cases they use a kind of like a toggle, because you also want to maybe reverse it, throw it out of the cache. But that's giving the user the decision. That's a separate pattern to the passively cache stuff.
More than a bookmark because it's available offline. Like it's storing the content, not just the fact that like I wanted to save this. It actually saved it.
Save for offline.
I'm saying like you could use a bookmark as like an affordance to
Or the interface.
signal for that.
I mean, wouldn't it also at some point make sense for if you use your browser bookmark tool, bookmark page for it to save it offline? Like, wouldn't that make sense? So you can visit your bookmarks while you're offline. Why don't browsers do that?
A few times today we've been asking about why browsers don't do things.
Safari does it.
Does it?
Really?
So, yeah.
So it gets the last version.
But that's
So I don't know if we should give names to these patterns or something. Like it feels like. So this is the ultimate thing. Is that all of these are to do with freshness. Well, there's another thing which is
Are you naming solutions or are you naming use cases?
patterns, I guess, recipes.
So solutions.
Yes. Yes. Or do you think use cases? Do you mean use case like type of website? Or-
Yes.
Okay.
I think you could name both sets.
All right.
And
So.
then draw lines between them.
So type of, so online book, that's a pretty niche one, but a blog, that's
That's common.
common.
A few of us have those.
News,
I saw a news site gave you a crossword when you were
Guardian, yeah.
Guardian.
So that's one thing. Your offline page is also an opportunity for a bit of fun. Trivago, the travel site, if you try to use that when you're offline, it gives you a maze puzzle game to play, the offline maze. Yeah, that's something else. That's a whole other thing. What you put on your offline page, like it could be something quite fun or useful.
Is that
Like,
the new 404 page?
yeah, it is exactly that. So 404 pages have always been. It's a branding opportunity. It's a bit of a personality opportunity. It's totally the same with offline. You can have some fun with it, or you can actually make it useful as well. Like you got a conference or an event website. Your offline page could be, here are the basic details you need to know. Your offline can't give you that information you requested, but these are the dates, this is the location, whatever it is.
So just to clarify that the offline page isn't like a built-in mechanism thing, right? It's like what you do when you don't have something in the cache. Is that the idea?
Okay, I'll back up. So when you pre-cache stuff, one of the things you can pre-cache, so please pre-cache this HTML page. Let's call it offline.html. And now that that's in the cache, you know that's going to be available. So now you can use it in any of your recipes. Try the network, try the cache, and then if all else fails, pull this out of cache, because I know it's in the cache. I pre-cached it. And then that page itself can contain clever JavaScript that could do things like,
Read the cache itself.
yeah, you can access cache from HTML as well.
Can you
Yeah,
query the cache?
you can. You don't have to do that through service work. You can do that from a regular web page. The API works both ways. So then you can say, yeah, here are the pages you've cached. Whether that was the passive, I'm caching them as we go, or the explicit, I want to save this for offline. So that the code to do that part, to redisplay that stuff, has to be in the offline page. So it gets cached, yeah. So it's, yeah, you get nothing for free. Like you have to write this stuff. It's definitely packaged. So book, blogs, news sites. I mean, somewhere it feels like, oh no, I'll tell you one, games. I wish, like little in-browser games that really don't need an internet connection, they could do with service workers, you know, because when I'm on an airplane, that's what I'm doing. But in terms of indie web stuff, I guess blogs is going to be the...
So is it for reading or writing?
The games situation?
Blog.
Oh, blogs. Oh, good point.
Reading at this point.
Mine, the one I did was for writing.
Yeah, it's another, yeah.
That's a whole nother level.
Are those two different use cases?
Yes.
Yeah.
And service worker can help
Sure does.
in both. Yeah. Differently. Yes. Do you use background sync?
No,
Okay.
that
So
was
you
too
sort of-
complicated.
Yeah, that's complicated.
Save and then post later when you're online.
Exactly. So what I did last in Nuremberg, where I started, I didn't finish it then.
Yeah.
It's too complicated. But I made a app where I log everything I eat and when I drink on my website using an app, and the app is typically it's a website that I go to, and it requires an internet connection, obviously,
Yeah.
to load the interface so I can even just type in what I ate,
Yeah.
much less to then post it to my
Yeah.
website. And when I'm on an airplane and on the internet, I wanted to still be able to write this down.
Yeah.
So what I did is I made an offline web page that pre-caches everything that it needs, and then when I click post, it just stores it
Yeah, locally.
locally. And then as soon as it realizes it's online again, it goes and it queries the storage, and then it just goes pushes everything up to the website.
So currently, if you do that last step, where it's like realize it's online again, you have to have that page open in a browser.
You do, yeah. That doesn't happen in the
Right.
background.
And
But
the
it's like the
background-
next time I open the app,
Yeah.
it just goes and
Yeah.
pushes everything up.
Yeah, and that's good. And what background sync does is it will do that without you opening the browser. So like literally, you arrive in the airport.
Does it work on iPhones too?
Hmm?
Does that work on iPhones?
Background sync is not in iPhones.
Okay, yeah.
No, I'm pretty sure it's
Background sync is barely in
yeah.
native
Background sync is very.
Even just the
It is.
concept of doing stuff in the background on iPhone in native apps
Yeah.
is barely there. So,
And notifications is one of the other things where you can,
Mm.
again, a service worker comes in, but I need to go through patterns for that. But I don't know, making people's lives miserable enough as it is.
But notifications, that's like those autoplay videos on news sites, right?
Basically, yes. But now you can have notifications from tantech.com through service workers. You post a website and somebody receives a notification that you've posted a blog post and somebody receives a notification. That's now possible on the web thanks to service workers. Well, service workers is the channel that with services, you access all these APIs. They have to be asynchronous APIs. So we've talked about the cache API, the fetch API is the one that goes to network. Background sync is one with very little browser support, but again, it goes. Notification is another one. I am really only looking at cache and fetch in terms of these use cases. But for the future, something like background sync, for that use case of writing something offline and then having it post once there's a network connection available, it would remove that step of having to take the device out and go to the URL for it to, yeah. I
So
mean,
you haven't looked at any like positive notification use cases, or is that, do you think it's out of scope for this?
no, it's totally in scope. Want to go there? I've never implemented notifications personally. Has anybody? Yeah, how was it?
Something. Well, it's two parts.
Yeah.
One part is the actual showing the bar thing on your device. That's one part of it, and the other part is the push API,
Yeah.
which is an older thing like subscribing to and then having a backend that pings.
It looks
URL.
complicated.
Yeah, it was.
It looks very
for
complicated.
pages.
But it's worth noting as a use case. You know, personal thing, like I like your website and I want to know when you publish. You could give me the opportunity. I think the patterns there are more about how you get the permission from the reader to send him notifications, and you don't do it the moment they visit the website. You don't do
Well,
it.
actually,
Right.
You don't. If you, that was one of the things when I was working with it. There are actually two separate things, and I first didn't notice it. But when you receive the push message, you have to tell the notification API, like display this message. You have to write that yourself. So you could also do something else. I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know, but if it.
Oh, you mean you can
works-
make use of the push API without
if it-
making use of
if it
notifications?
were- Yeah, if you got an activation of your service worker, you might be able, I don't know, but you might be able to to go to the network and fetch another page. So you can actually cache the, I don't know if it's works,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it would be a nice thing.
It probably does. I suspect it does, at least on the
4 minutes.
Oh, shoot. Well, that's so what you could do is be updating the cache
Yeah.
with fresh blog posts, and the user hasn't even visited your
No,
website.
yeah.
Ooh.
So is that kind of like the Twitter like click here for new tweets thing?
Yeah.
Except you wouldn't even be on Twitter. Like Twitter's getting new tweets while you're, you know.
But it's
visiting
on
it.
your website. Or you're visiting someone's website.
No, I'm saying that you visit with someone's website once, and then after that, they're putting new posts in your cache while you're visiting a completely different website.
Or while you're eating dinner.
Yeah.
Sounds
Throw it in
creepy.
your pocket.
Yeah.
It does sound a little creepy.
And that bit doesn't require permission?
I don't know. No, yeah, you have to at least give permission for the notifications.
Yeah.
I have not tested
then
it,
you-
so we
But
should,
you
but
didn't mention notification.
Only the push
Right.
API.
it's the push API, but the browser calls it notifications, I believe, but.
Okay. But technically it's
that's
not.
that's the weird part of it. So you have to it asks for support for notifications, and then it gives you like a URL, and to the backend you have to send.
Right. So technically
URL
you're
to
giving
your
permission
backend
for
yourself.
you're giving permission to a different API
Yeah.
or two APIs when you
Yeah.
say yes. And you can't get permission. You can't.
One security check for two
Yes.
APIs.
One security
Yeah.
for two APIs.
Oh.
And you need.
So you do still need to.
Terrible thing we could do with this.
What's the word?
For months.
I mean, no, that's a good question to ask. Service worker thing in general, because you have programmatic access to a cache, you can do stuff like precaching. You can, be a bad citizen and fill it up with lots of stuff. Fill it up with outdated stuff. You have to clean up that cache. You get fresh versions. You got to throw away the old version. Like that's up to you.
No, that was a good question actually. Is it more like a storage, where
The
you actually have
cache
to
is.
put things in it and take them out? It's not, whereas like a cache might delete itself.
Expired.
No, it's not. So the browser cache will clean itself every now and
Yeah.
then.
This is not that.
It won't get cleaned until dire need, basically. That's not true. Different browsers do it differently. Safari does it after 30 days. or
So
something.
the browsers have their own rule for when they're going to delete stuff out of
Yeah.
this API.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's not storage, but it's also like a little more permanent than.
It's way more permanent than the browser cache,
Okay.
the regular browser cache. It's probably not as permanent as something like
Local
local
storage?
storage. It's in the same camp as like local storage and IndexedDB. It's like this is site-specific stuff, and we're not going to clean it up until we really need the space. There's actually another API called, it's another permission one. Oh, I can't remember the name of it. I don't think it's implemented anywhere, where you can request from the user, same with like geolocation or like notifications. This site wants to, store a bunch of stuff. Do you agree? And if you give that permission, it goes into a storage bit that's protected. It might be called, I forget what it's called. And that will effectively never get cleaned up.
Oh,
Because
so
the
it's
user said
requesting permanent storage.
effectively permanent storage. Because the user said they were okay with it. You can treat this cache as pretty permanent, certainly compared to the browser cache, which gets cleaned up, all the time.
So if you put like a JavaScript file or a CSS file or something in there, do you have to worry about that it might disappear someday?
Yeah, you can't completely rely on it being in the cache.
So do you have to handle like checking if it's there and refetching?
Yeah,
You
so
can't just,
this is why almost all the time in whatever recipes, it's like, instead of being like, do this, your recipe is almost always going to be, try this, and if that doesn't work, here's my next best. So instead of saying, fetch it from the cache, I know it's in the cache, you would say, try fetching it from the cache, and if you can't find it in the cache, then go to the network. And if you can't find it in the network, here's the offline page or something like that. So you almost never, all of these recipes are almost never 100% like, just do this thing. It's always this kind of
It's a
try
very
catch.
interesting change in how you program. Because normally you write a program and you're like, computer, do this thing, and you assume that it will work.
This is literally using like try. Try this thing.
Yeah, that's always been a bad habit whenever a network's involved.
Yeah. I quite like this.
So it's the most brittle part of the system.
Yeah.
I quite like that we end up literally typing the word try, because it gets like, yeah, you can't rely on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Try this?
But it is very easy to write. I've written a few recipes which are just like return a blank page, and then that's what happens forever because service worker. You have to go delete the thing.
Yeah.
It's better than, there used to be a technology called app cache for doing offline, and that was a nightmare because of cache invalidation.
I think it was Düsseldorf was when I started using AppCache, and I think you were helping me with that for quite
Time's up.
Really?
years ago.
I hope it's gone now, because,
It's gone.
yeah, good.
You solved all
Anyway.
the problems of offline.
I didn't even get to even listing all the problems. We need to give these recipes names, is my feeling, right? These patterns of like,
Well, that's
Try
something
this
we
and-
could get into more use cases.
yeah.
This being IndieWebCamp. Like,
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
me,
we're gonna do.
Have you got a blog? Try
this
this
is
pattern.
readers with